What is the best movie in the history of Super Sentai? For half of a century, the Super Sentai franchise has given us tons of thrilling movie projects that expand on the stories of our favorite heroes and offer us a new perspective into the universes they inhabit. For this list, I'm going to include theatrical films, as well as V Cinema and V Cinext releases, because if I didn't, I would have to leave off tons of movies that I really love, and I think a lot of you guys probably do too. I tried to focus on movies that have a longer runtime, so if your favorite 10-minute DVD isn't on this list, well, that's probably why. But of course, let me know what your favorite Super Sentai movie is in the comments. And without further ado, let's get into it. First up, let's start out with Zyuohger Returns, Life Received the Earth's Monarch's Decisive Battle. This is a V Cinema release that takes place after the events of the series, and at this point in time we have humans and Jumans both living on Earth together. There's a lot of struggle for control of the Earth between the humans and the Jumans, so it's decided that a martial arts tournament will be held called the Champion of Earth in order to determine which species will control and rule over the Earth. This tournament is run by a man named Hokane Daniro, and they find out that he runs a casino and turns debt slaves into actual jewels. Like, literally, he purposely gets people in debt in his casino, and when they can't pay, he just turns them into jewels. But of course, our heroes hatch a plan to rescue everybody from inside of the jewels. And I really just like the vibe here between the martial arts tournament and the heavy casino theming. This is a really good continuation of the series if you like Zyuohger, and like I said, the tournament and casino themes, I really enjoy. Next up is Kiramager the movie, Bebop Dream. This is a theatrical release that was originally scheduled to premiere on July 23rd, 2020, but it was postponed until February 20th, 2021 due to the pandemic, and this movie was eventually triple billed alongside U-Soldier and the recently announced Zenkaiger. This movie is very dream-focused, as the Kiramagers encounter a witch named Minjo, who wields a beastly scythe, and she has the power to control dreams and place the Rangers in some wacky and unique dream scenarios that will definitely entertain you and keep you interested. Of course, the end of Kiramager suffered a little bit due to the pandemic, and I feel like this movie does a really good job at making up for that. From what I've seen within my community, Kiramager seems to be a very popular show, and the dynamic in this movie between the Kiramagers and Minjo is very entertaining, and if you're into Kiramager, this is just a solid, entertaining cherry on top that you will definitely want to watch after you finish the series. Next up is Go-Go 5, Sudden Shock: A New Warrior. This is a V Cinema release in which the Rangers encounter a golden warrior named Jiku, who is on the hunt for an evil alien named Gorumoa, or Golomoy, to stop him from retrieving the Dark Sword, a sword that he knows is on this planet and is a weapon that would make him capable of ruling the entire Earth. Jiku is played by Keiichi Wada, who also played Ryo in Die Ranger. This guy is an absolute legend. I would say he's one of the most recognizable Toku actors out there, and it's pretty cool seeing him show up in a Go-Go 5 movie. Later on, Jiku encounters Kyoko, who reminds him of a fellow warrior from his past named Lydia, and eventually she would be able to even use his armor. This is a cool one-off story, and the first time I saw this, whenever Ryo showed up, I instantly geeked out and was totally invested for the rest of this movie. The next one on the list is a newer movie. This is King Ohger Adventure Heaven. This is a theatrical film that was double billed with the Kamen Rider Geats movie, Four Aces and the Black Fox. In this film, while Gira is set to be coronated as King of Shugodom, he encounters a young childhood friend who disappeared from his orphanage when he was young, named Divonica. She shows up singing a beautiful song, and of course he recognizes her. This woman opens a door to Hakabaka, or the world of the dead, to meet the original king of Shugodom. Our heroes must navigate the world of the dead and find a way back home, which of course is not going to be easy, and they'll have to go through some conflict on the way, which is to be expected. This movie has a really good original story about what it means to be a king, and it gives a lot of context to the history of the King Ohger universe that I think any King Ohger fan will really appreciate. Next up is O-Ranger, Ole vs. Kaku Ranger. This is a V-Cinema release, and it was the very first of the traditional team-up films, something that would go on to become a staple within the franchise. In this movie, the O-Rangers have to face Baragir and Onbu Obake, so they team up with Kaku Ranger. This movie is very weird, but fun. I'm not gonna lie, there are some things in this movie that will probably make you raise an eyebrow. But despite the weirdness of this movie, all of the interactions here are extremely entertaining, especially Hiroshi Miyauchi really shining as Chief Counselor Naoyuki Miura, playing guitar like a cowboy and just generally being a badass. And this movie has so much historical significance, being the first Versus film, that I really think it deserves a spot here. Next up is Magi Ranger the movie, Bride of Infertia. This was a theatrical film that was double billed alongside Hibiki and the Seven Senki. And this movie takes place between episodes 25 and 27 of Magi Ranger. In this film, Yamazaki is kidnapped and taken to Infertia to become a bride to the Infertia's commander, while Kai and the other Magi Rangers journey to Magitopia and Infertia itself to save her. If the fantasy elements within Magi Ranger are something that resonates with you that you really like, this movie has more of that. And this movie even features one of my absolute favorite Toku actresses, Machiko Soga, as the heavenly arch-saint Magier. And of course, this woman steals the spotlight wherever she goes. So to say that she's a standout would be an understatement. In my opinion, Magi Ranger is always tons of fun, and this movie is no exception. Who are you? Next up, we have O-Ranger the movie. This was a theatrical film that was shown as a triple feature alongside Hakaider and Juko B-Fighter the movie. It was a celebration project for the 20th anniversary of the franchise, and even though O-Ranger can be an incredibly divisive Sentai season, this movie is so weird and unique that I think you owe it to yourself to watch it. This takes place between episodes 8 and 9, so fairly early on in the season, in which Prince Buldont uses a fake movie studio as a front to kidnap people, and our heroes have to stop it, of course. If you like O-Ranger, this is of course more of that, but I feel like they dialed up the strangeness to 11 on this one, and some things will catch you by surprise because of just how random they are. If you're looking for something a little bit different, this will be a good choice. Next up at 37 is Tokuger Goes and Returns, Super Tokyu Nanago of Dreams. And this is a V-Cinema release that takes place after the events of the show. This is a really fun continuation of the series, and we even get to meet Tokyu Nanago, a new Violet 7th Ranger. Tokuger gets tons of love from a lot of you in the community. I see the comments. And I think a lot of that is because of the heart that they put into these stories, and the whole imagination thing. You know, it's a series that you feel. This is a very warm, well-written movie, and I feel like there's a strong sense of triumph as well. If you're a fan of the series, definitely watch this. Next up is Shinkinger vs. Go-Onger Ginmakbang. This is a theatrical film set between Act 35 and Act 38 of Shinkinger, in which the Go-Ongers get sucked through a portal before Sosuke, or Go-On Red, meets Shinkinger. Of course, Sosuke and Takeru clash because of their vastly different personalities, which can be pretty damn funny. And in this movie, it takes place during Christmas time in Japan.
Merry Christmas!
Merry Christmas!
Eventually, the rest of the Go-Ongers would show up as well, and we would have both teams uniting to take on both villain factions, as you would expect. I have to say that this movie has one of the coolest henshin sequences that I've ever seen in a Sentai movie, and I'm not 100% sure about the reason why. You know, I mean, roll calls are in pretty much all of these, but there's just something really cool about this one. Shinkinger is one of my favorite series, and Go-Onger is not too far behind, so if you like those series like I do, this one's a no-brainer. Next up is Denjiman, the movie. This is a theatrical film taking place somewhere between episodes 8 and 26. In this film, a mother is kidnapped by the Vader clan to the horror of her young daughter named Harumi, and of course, Denjiman has to rescue her and reunite her with her daughter. Over the course of this film, we learn the deep history of Planet Denji and how Princess Denji arrived on Earth. There are parts of this film that go through different film genres, such as Western, samurai film, sports, etc., and it reminds me a lot of Shinkinger's Special Act because it lets us see these characters in a different light. I think that Denjiman is a great series, and this movie is more Denjiman. But instead of just giving you more, it gives you a lot of extra context to this universe and its history, which definitely gets a thumbs up from me. Next up is Time Ranger vs. Go-Go 5, and this is a V-Cinema release that takes place between episodes 35 and 36 of Time Ranger. In this film, Pierre returns to join up with Don Donero and the Launders. This of course prompts the Time Rangers and Go-Go 5 to team up themselves in an effort to stop this new alliance. This is an entertaining watch that isn't super crazy, but it's really solid, and I feel like these two teams go really well together, in both personality and style. Next up is Tokuger vs. Kyoryuger the movie. This is a theatrical film set after the events of Kyoryuger and in between episodes 35 and 39 of Tokuger. And this movie is also known as the Imagination and Brave movie. In this movie, our heroes have to save the Galaxy Line from falling from space, while at the same time the Tokugers have been turned into kids. This movie is a lot of fun, as you'd expect from these Sentais, and I have to say that in my opinion this is one of the more movie-ish movies on the list, if that makes sense. It feels really big budget, and it's so much fun with how visually dynamic it looks and how entertaining the action set pieces are. The characters from Tokuger and Kyoryuger pretty much all just ooze charisma, so the runtime of this movie will feel much shorter than it actually is, just because of how entertaining it is. Next up is Mega Ranger vs. Car Ranger. This is an original video release, which means that this film predates V-Cinema. This movie takes place after the events of Car Ranger and between episodes 39 and 42 of Mega Ranger. This is a pretty strange story about a wish-granting clamshell and the Car Rangers falling under the evil spell of Shibolina before they are ultimately cured and the two teams fight together. The story is pretty cool and entertaining, but this is another release that is successful mostly because of the chemistry and the likability of the two teams. They both have so much personality that it's easy to become interested in this plot. Their interactions between each other will draw you in and make you want to keep watching to the end of the movie. Next up at 31 is Q Ranger, episode of Stinger. This is a V Cinema release that takes place throughout the events of the show. As you would expect by the title, this is mostly about Stinger and his journey to find his brother. He ends up meeting a woman named Mika who is half human and half monster. Sounds kinda weird, but this is a surprisingly somber story that works very, very hard to make you feel sympathy for her, and although she causes a lot of destruction and suffering, you still might walk away from this movie feeling bad for her. For this movie, we get a heavy dose of singing and depressing piano music, but it works really well here, and it helps to sell the emotional angle that the makers of this film want to hit you with. Stinger is played by Yosuke Kishi, who is a professional singer as well as an actor. He performs these songs very well, and if he sucked, this movie would probably fall pretty flat. Towards the end of this movie, it starts to feel more like what you would expect from a Q Ranger movie in regards to tone and action, and we finish up strong with an explosive final act that will leave the audience thrilled and thoroughly satisfied. Next up is Gao Ranger vs Super Sentai. This is a V Cinema release, but instead of it being team versus team, this is Gao Ranger along with quite a few classic Rangers from the franchise like Big One, Red Falcon, and one of my favorite Pink Rangers of all time in Mega Pink, or Miku. We also have an appearance from every Red hero in history up to this point, and they just lay on the fan service here. I'm not sure, but when this released in 2001, it was easily one of the heaviest doses of fan service that the franchise had ever seen before. Throughout this movie, we explore the rich history of Super Sentai and the legendary teams that preceded the Gao Rangers. I know that Gao Ranger isn't the most loved of franchises within the Toku community, but this movie has a heavy focus on some of my favorite Rangers of the past, so it's definitely worth a watch, especially if you're a fan of Big One, Red Falcon, or Miku. This movie walked, so 199 Hero Great Battle could run. Next up at number 29 is Abaranger vs Hurricaneger, and this is a V Cinema release. This film is considered non-canon due to contradictions with both series timelines, but Abaranger and Hurricaneger are two really great Sentais that make this a good versus movie that you won't want to miss. In this movie, the Aberrangers meet Furabijo and Windinu, who ended up in Dino Earth after surviving the events of the Hurricaneger finale. It turns out that they are now in an alliance with the Evodians. The evil duo of Furabijo and Windinu release the evil ninja Iga, so they have to team up and take him on.
Sí. Entendido.
As far as the story and plot goes, this is a pretty standard versus movie, but it's very entertaining, and the quality of these two teams make it maybe a little better than it deserves to be.
Busters! Ready? Go!
Next up is Tokume Sentai Go Busters Returns versus Dobutsu Sentai Go Busters. This is a V Cinema release that serves as an epilogue of Go Busters. On December 31st, 2012, the great demon lord Azazel shows up in the world of the Busters and is able to pretty much smoke them in battle. Enter, God, awards Cheetah Nick with a special prize for being the 1 millionth death of the year. Congrats. And the prize is that he can wish for anything except for the death of Azazel. Nick wishes to go to a world where the incident from 13 years prior never happened. This is kind of an interesting premise, and it's cool to see things from a different perspective and with a new set of circumstances. Of course, this film features the Dobutsu Sentai Go Busters, a slightly different looking take on the traditional suits to go in line with this different world. I give them major props for doing something so wildly unique and different with this story. I feel like the cast of Go Busters is really good, and if they had just made a simple, more standard Go Busters movie, it probably would have been successful, but they took a big risk and did something unique and original, and I think they hit it out of the park with this one, especially in terms of originality. Next up is Kamen Rider and Super Sentai Tyson. This is a theatrical release meant to commemorate the 10th anniversary of TV Asahi's Superhero Time. This movie has a lot of heroes, but focuses mostly on Gokaiger, Go Busters, Kamen Rider Decade, Fulzit, and Oz. Basically, if you're a fan of Super Sentai and Kamen Rider, this movie was made for you. We start out with Captain Marvelous being a direct threat towards the Kamen Riders as he seeks to gain the ultimate power in the universe with the Daizangyak fleet at his command. At the same time, Kamen Rider Decade leads Daishocker once again to defeat all Sentais. So we have a direct conflict between these iconic characters in which both of them want to wipe out the entirety of each other's franchises. Which sounds like a pretty explosive conflict, because it is. This movie has a crap ton of fan service for fans of both franchises, as you'd expect. And the Captain Marvelous vs. Tsukasa angle makes this movie feel like a huge, big budget, heavyweight matchup that you will definitely want to watch. I really wish I could have seen this one on the big screen. Next up at 26 is Lupin Ranger vs. Pat Ranger vs. Q Ranger. This is a V-Sin X release that takes place roughly between episodes 42 and 43 of Lupin Ranger vs. Pat Ranger. This is another versus that is successful mostly because of the likability of these teams, because they are freaking likable. This was the first Versus release to cross over 3 teams, although it only crosses over 2 series. Both of these seasons have really unique vibes, so it's super entertaining to see how they play off of each other and how their personalities interact. The story isn't anything crazy, but this is another very high quality Versus film, and if you're a fan of these teams, you will definitely enjoy this movie, but if you're not a fan of these teams yet, give this a watch anyway, and it might change your mind. Next up at number 25 is Kyoryuger vs. Go Busters Dinosaur Great Battle. This is a theatrical release that takes place after Go Busters and between episodes 36 and 37 of Kyoryuger, featuring the title teams, but also featuring the other dino teams, Zyuranger and Aba Ranger. Along with the classic Rangers, we also have some clone versions of classic Sentai villains such as Grifferzor, as well as the resurrection of Enter and Escape. The team interactions are excellent, especially Amy and Yoko, and it's cool to see the classic Dino teams join together along with the Busters for a really good mix of modern and retro. Next up is Geki Ranger vs. Bokinger. This is a V-Cinema release, and the continuity here is a bit unclear, but this is a great standalone Versus release with 2 teams that, in my opinion, are quite a bit underrated. This movie features a very interesting story about a red jewel with a mysterious origin that will see these Rangers traveling to South America. Geki Ranger is easily one of the most unique Sentais, and with Bokinger being the adventure Sentai, we get a ton of adventure here with some really cool scenes, and I think this is a great standalone project, meaning if you're just in the mood to watch some Sentai but you're not really sure what, this would be a good one to throw on. Number 23 is Go Busters vs. Gokaiger. This is a theatrical film that takes place between episodes 40 and 42 of Go Busters. Gokaiger is obviously an insanely popular season, and Go Busters gets a ton of love from within my community, so I think that this movie is a no-brainer for the list. This is a story about Zongyak and Enter attempting to find the Phantom Ranger keys. Keys that are supposedly powerful enough for the wielder to conquer the Earth. Obviously that's not a good thing, so our heroes are gonna have to stop them. I found this movie extremely satisfying, meaning that the interaction between the Rangers here, as well as the scale of the action, was even bigger and better than what I was hoping. Next up is Magi Ranger vs. Deca Ranger, and this is a V Cinema release that takes place between episodes 31 and 32 of Magi Ranger. Magi Ranger is another underrated Sentai, in my opinion, and in this movie they team up with Deca Ranger, an absolutely hilarious season, and one of my favorites. This is a story in which Urara gets captured, with the ransom being an item called the Flower of Heaven. The story is fine, but the interactions here are definitely what makes it. Both teams have so much personality, and Umiko and Hoka being on the screen at the same time is an absolute treat. These two have enough personality for the whole damn movie, and this film will absolutely brighten your day. Next up is Kamen Rider and Super Sentai and Space Sheriff Superhero Taisen Zeto. This is a theatrical release, and it is a sequel to Superhero Taisen, but obviously this time we have the addition of Space Sheriff from the Metal Heroes franchise. The catchphrase of this movie is "Get up, all superheroes, all of space versus all of Earth. The one and only ultimate battle begins." Catchy, right? In this movie, the three different franchises fight against each other as you would expect, and then eventually team up to fight Space Shocker. Yes, Space Shocker. This movie is mostly about the Go Busters, Kyoryuger, Kamen Rider Wizard, Beast, and Gavin, and I think you'll get the most enjoyment if you're a fan of all three franchises, but if you just come for Go Busters and for Super Sentai, you'll definitely get that. They just share the screen with Kamen Rider and Space Sheriff. This movie, like its predecessor, is meant to dump fan service, and this is a huge movie that feels big budget. Another one that I would have loved to see on the big screen. Next up is Go Onger vs. Geki Ranger, the movie. This was planned to be a V Cinema release, but it released in theaters to celebrate the 15th entry in the Versus series. This movie has various continuity errors that make it hard to determine the timeline, so I view it as kind of non-canon, but the story here is fun, and this is a great standalone Versus film starring two pretty excellent teams that can both be pretty lighthearted and fun at times, especially with the Geki Rangers training the Go Ongers. I think these two teams are pretty underrated in the community, and I think that this film is a good showcase of just how much fun, excitement, and charm these two Sentai seasons have. This movie was the last time that Geki Ranger would appear together as a team, so if you're a fan of Geki Ranger, you should definitely watch it for that reason. And there's just a lot of charming weirdness here. Like, I especially love the training segments when the Geki Rangers are teaching the Go Ongers things like catching a bunch of leaves and playing the piano with toes. I love the goofiness in this movie, and if you're into that kind of vibe, definitely check this one out. Next up, we have Deca Ranger vs. Abba Ranger. This is a V Cinema release that takes place after the events of Abba Ranger and between episodes 31 and 32 of Deca Ranger. Another movie with two great teams from two great series.
Abba, 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 Abba Ranger.
First off, this movie is filled with very funny interactions. Obviously, Deca Ranger is filled with a bunch of insane people, but I think the charm and likability of the characters from Abba Ranger really mesh well with them. We start with Abba Ranger stealing Deca Ranger's car and crashing before being arrested by them. And I think that that alone is pretty indicative of the kind of nonsense that we're going to be treated to throughout this movie. But as things go, these teams would eventually work things out and team up together in order to stop an enemy named Kozak. This movie is absolutely made because of the likability of the teams and the really strange comedic tone that Deca Ranger has at times. It actually meshes better with Abba Ranger than I would have initially expected. Next up is Saber and Zenkaiger Superhero Senki. And I know this will probably surprise some of you guys. This is a theatrical movie, and it is a crossover between Kamen Rider Saber and Zenkaiger to celebrate the Kamen Rider 50th anniversary and the Super Sentai 45th anniversary. The catchphrase of this movie is "Straightforward Heroes, half of the century." Now, Saber might not be one of my favorite Kamen Rider series, and Zenkaiger gets quite a bit of hate from the community at large, but the thing is that this is another heavy dose of fan service, and honestly, even if you're not into Saber or Zenkaiger, I would still highly recommend this film, because it's another one of those let's see how many characters we can get on screen at one time kind of movies. If you are a fan of Kamen Rider and Super Sentai, this is an absolute must-watch. This movie does an excellent job at showcasing both franchises, and whenever you see Kamen Rider Ichigo and Aka Ranger standing side by side, I don't know how you could not be hyped by that. If you're a fan of Toei, definitely check this one out. Next up is Go-Onger 10 Years Grand Prix. This is considered a V-Cinema release despite having a very tiny theater run prior to a Blu-ray release. This film of course takes place 10 years after the show, and if you're a fan of Go-Onger, it's an absolute no-brainer.
Smile, smile.
In my opinion, this show has a great cast, and it's really cool to catch up, until we realize that the Go-Ongers have been labeled as terrorists, and it is illegal for them to operate as rangers, and Saki is working for the government while directly opposing the rest of the group. The setup here is strong, and I think because Saki was such a likable character on the original series, this serves as a strong hook to keep you interested, because you're definitely going to root for and want to see her redemption here. One thing that I really like about this movie is the Rangers getting made fun of for their flip phones, because it's old technology now. And there's some cool kind of sci-fi elements to this film that you might not expect. Some movies are just like a bigger episode, but this feels unique. Not just because it's a 10-year anniversary film, but the story and the vibes here are pretty different from other Sentai movies. Next up at 16 is Deca Ranger the Movie, Full Blast Action. This is a theatrical film that takes place between episodes 23 and 29 of Deca Ranger. In this movie, our heroes pursue a group of criminals and fight for the prosperity of planet Leslie, and their inhabitants, the Leslians, by returning the stolen Golden Snow.
私もスペシャルポリスなの。レスリー製のね。
レスリー製の
In this movie, we meet a woman named Marie who is also from Special Police, but she's from Planet Leslie, and things aren't really what they seem. Obviously, with this being a Deca Ranger movie, the mystery theme is nothing new to this series, but this is a huge mystery, and although it kind of feels like just a huge episode, this movie is loaded with action, and it of course features Deca Ranger, one of the most popular Sentais, so I would say that this is a must-watch.
Choo choo, ah wah wah. Choo choo choo, ah wah wah.
If you're watching through Deca Ranger again, or for the first time, don't forget to set a little time aside to watch this movie. Next up, we have Bokenger vs. Super Sentai. This is considered a V-Cinema release that celebrates the 30th anniversary of the Super Sentai franchise. And this movie is set between episodes 42 and 43 of Bokenger. In this movie, the Bokengers team up with some legendary rangers to take on the time demon Kronos. We even get an appearance from Aka Red. This movie features pretty standard fan service that you would expect from a team-up, but what I really like about this one is that the guest rangers here are given quite a bit of time to shine. Some of these movies feature so many rangers and different characters that some of them can get lost in the shuffle, but this movie has a smaller, more intimate cast, so we can spend a little bit more time with the rangers that are here. And it's cool to see what the rangers are up to in the current timeline. I especially love Tetsu, or Deca Break, being a mafia type and throwing people around while screaming Nazis. Like I said, this is a celebration movie, but it's really focused on the smaller cast of characters that's here. I think the movie is all the better for that. Next up is King Oger vs. Kyoryuger. This is a V-Cin X movie, and it is the 30th Versus film. This movie was released alongside King Oger vs. Don Brothers, but that film is incredibly short, so I'll be focusing on this one. This movie takes place during the events of episodes 32 and 33 of Kyoryuger, and after the events of the King Oger vs. Don Brothers movie. This is the most recent film on this list, featuring two fun teams, and I like the new team versus old team dynamic here. This movie features the old trope about the timeline being changed, and it results in us having an evil Gira that rules with an iron fist, and another world where Debos was never stopped. It's cool to see different sides of these universes from what we're used to, and I feel like all of these Kyoryu crossovers are good. Like, basically every crossover that features Kyoryuger is awesome, in my opinion. Like, the personalities on that team are just so huge, like you could probably put them with anybody and it would make for something that was worth watching. But that being said, King Oger are no slouches, and there's some good characters on that team as well, and I know that some people will say that this is here because of recency bias, and maybe that's true, but honestly, I would call it Kyoryuger bias, if anything. Next up at number 13 is Kamen Rider and Super Sentai Cho Superhero Taisen. This is a theatrical release, and it was the fourth and final Superhero Taisen movie. The catchphrase for this one is "Gather, the power of all heroes." And this movie takes place before episode 7 of Q Ranger and after episode 23 of Kamen Rider X-Aid. This is a team up with tons of fan service, but it focuses mostly on Q Ranger, X-Aid, and Zyuohger. In this movie, the game world from X-Aid attacks Earth and creates the Arena of Death, where our heroes must fight for the survival of Earth. Sounds like pretty standard fare, but honestly the story just serves to get everyone on the same screen, and if you like the characters that are featured here, this movie is a lot of fun, and it feels really big budget. But honestly, the reason that it's higher than the other Taisen movies is probably just because I vibe with some of the characters that are featured here, like Q Ranger and Kamen Rider X-Aid. So depending on how you feel about those series, your mileage may vary. This movie isn't quite as over the top about having every hero ever in one movie, but there are still quite a few here, and I enjoyed this movie quite a bit. Next up at number 12 is Kyoryuger Returns 100 Years After, and this is a V-Cinema release that of course takes place 100 years after the finale and focuses on the descendants of the original Rangers as they battle a new Deboth threat. In this movie, the Rangers from the future have repetitive colors and there's some funny banter where they get roasted for it. But we have blue, cyan, and navy, which are different shades of blue, and then we have silver and gray, which are basically the same thing, as well as violet, which I actually like a lot. And this movie has a really interesting take on the colors of each Ranger and what they actually represent. And although the future represented here isn't terribly different from present day, it's still cool to see familiar themes in a kind of mixed up setting. This movie is an absolute blast, and I would consider it an absolute standard of the Sentai franchise and a must-watch. Next up at number 11 is Gokaiger vs. Gavin, and this is a theatrical film. that takes place between episodes 44 and 47 of Gokaiger. With Metal Heroes being a retired franchise, what better way to introduce Gavin to a new generation than packaging him with the most popular Sentai of all time in Gokaiger? Gavin is a space sheriff, and the Gokaigers are space pirates, so this just feels natural and right. Not to mention, this movie feels big budget. Another one that I would have loved to watch on the big screen. In this movie, Gavin has a mission to capture the Gokaigers, but eventually he himself would become captured by a group of villains, and the Gokaigers have to rescue him, ironically. Gokaiger is extremely popular, and there is a lot of fan service here, as you would probably expect. Gavin himself, of course, is a throwback, and then you add to that the fact that the Gokaigers can become pretty much all the other Rangers, and this makes for a really cool dynamic with a cool, unique vibe that I can't quite put my finger on. Maybe it's because Gavin is so 80s, and the Gokaigers are a little bit more modern, it just leads to a great experience. This movie features legendary Toku actor Kinji Oba reprising his role as Gavin, and we even have appearances from his other famous roles as Battle Kinya and Dingy Blue. Also, we get a little dose of the Go Busters here. This is an explosive Toku space adventure, and if that doesn't make you want to watch it, I don't know what else will. Next up at number 10 is Zenkaiger vs. Kiramager vs. Senpaiger. This is a V-Sin X release that takes place after Zenkaiger and after the events of the Kiramager spin-off Yodana 2. I'm sure somebody is gonna give me crap about putting this goofy-ass movie so high on the list, but the goofiness here just makes me smile, especially all of the food references and the constant eating. This movie features two really fun, entertaining, and super lighthearted Sentais, plus a collection of classic Red Rangers from the franchise in Senpaiger, and this makes for a really cool and nostalgic Sentai project that even if you're not a fan of Zenkaiger, you still won't want to miss this. The story here is nothing that's insane, but it is solid, and it does a really good job of bringing together these two teams, as well as Senpaiger, the team of classic Rangers, and I think the interactions here are mostly pretty charming, and they did a good job of getting the most out of the likability of these characters. I feel like this movie is a really good mix of goofiness and fan service, and if you're in the mood for a lighthearted Sentai movie, you can do a lot worse than this one. Next up at number 9 is Hurricaneger 10 Years After. This is a V-Cinema release, and it was the first ever 10 Years After movie of the entire franchise. This movie obviously takes place 10 years after the events of the show, and this movie shows why Nanami is so badass, because she will fight somebody even when she's only wearing a towel. It's really cool to see where they are now, including Ikko's new band and Kota being a father now. In this movie, there have been bombings going on all over the world, and it turns out that Hurricane Dark is responsible, and he is none other than Yosuke, also known as Hurricane Red, who claims that the last 10 years have been a mistake, and he would refuse to elaborate. The other Rangers would have to solve this mystery, and of course, do a badass roll call and look awesome. It's a 10-year anniversary movie. Like, this movie is made specifically for the fans of the original series, and if that's you, it's an absolute no-brainer. Next up at number 8 is Q-Ranger vs. Space Squad. This is a V-Sin X release that takes place 4 years after Q-Ranger. We have, of course, Q-Ranger, as well as appearances from some other Sentais and classic villains, and of course we have some Metal Hero characters, with an appearance from Jiraiya, which I think is freaking awesome. If you're a fan of Q-Ranger or the Metal Heroes franchise, this one is for you. Next up at number 7 is the Abba Ranger 20th anniversary movie, The Unforgivable Abare. This is a Visa Next release that is of course a 20th anniversary movie, and it takes place 20 years after the show. This is a story about how time changes things in unexpected ways, and the Aberrangers banding together to fight once again. In this new, modern era, the public is much less accepting of the Aberrangers, and they frequently have to answer for their actions and motivations. And this movie explores what would happen if the world wasn't as accepting of the Aberrangers' brand of vigilante justice. We also are introduced to Abared's Cho Abare Max form, which looks freaking awesome in my opinion. And this movie came out fairly recently, so it might be kind of a recency bias, but I love me some Abaranger, and to see them reuniting as middle-aged warriors kicking ass is something pretty cool. Next up at number 6 is Gavin vs. Decker Ranger. This was a V Cinema release, but it actually had a very limited theater run prior to being released on home media. Just like the Gavin team up with Gokaiger, this movie feels like a big budget production, and you'll probably want to pop some popcorn for it. Geki, also known as Gavin, is investigating a deal with Mad Gallant when he decides to not wait for the fire squad and attack on his own before he is defeated and his partner Shelly seemingly killed in action at the same time. At the same time, the Rangers investigate a trend of vampiric killings with bite marks present on the victims' necks, and Umiko and Sin are getting married. Everything with Decker Ranger is pretty much good in my opinion. Like the cast here just exudes personality and charisma, so like you could put them in anything and it'd probably be good. And these plot points that I laid out for you might seem a bit random, but it actually works really well, and this was another great show to put Gavin with. When they put him with Gokaiger, they both have that space theme going for them. But whenever they put him with Decker Ranger, clearly the thing that they have in common is law enforcement and a sense of justice. Next up at number 5, we have Comeback Samurai Sentai Shinkenger Special Act. And this is a V Cinema release that takes place between episodes 35 and 44 of Shinkenger. This movie is incredibly strange, but also unbelievably entertaining. It's really comedy focused for the first half, in which Egedosh sends the Rangers to different dimensions that the movie cycles between, and these dimensions are represented by different film genres and styles, such as a samurai film, a film where the Rangers are forest animals, a crime drama, and even more. This movie goes through a lot of different settings and styles that you wouldn't expect, and we even get to see Ginta in a sushi showdown inside of the Old West. Eventually, this movie would become more like a traditional Shinkenger project to send everybody home happy, but the first half of this movie, where it's in its peak weirdness, is definitely where it shines. Next up at number 4 is the Hurricaneger 20th Anniversary. This is a V-Cin Next release, and it's a 20th anniversary release of Hurricaneger, obviously. For this one though, they did something completely different. This movie takes place in the Edo period of Japan, and the sets, costumes, and props look authentic, at least as far as I could tell, and I found it really cool that they did something other than just the same thing again, but older. We start with the predecessors of the Hurricanegers and the Go-Raigers engaged in conflict over the protection of Princess Teruhime and the Ascension Stone that she possesses. This stone can supposedly lead to the world's destruction because, of course, she is pursued by Oiranda, who is a pretty cool villain, and Teruhime goes to some extreme lengths to keep Oiranda from getting the stone. Oh, she'll get it back. Eventually, this period's Rangers are introduced to the Rangers from modern day, and it's really entertaining to see these characters from both time periods interact with each other and how the Edo period characters are blown away by the technology and henshin ability of the Hurricanegers. Like they've never even seen electricity, and now they have henshining heroes in front of them. It's gotta be pretty mind-blowing. I really hope that we get a 30th anniversary movie in the future. That would be awesome. Next up at number 3 is Ten Gokaiger. This is a Visa Next release and the 10th anniversary of Gokaiger. 10 years in the future, the Sentai fight against each other in the Super Sentai Derby Coliseum due to the utilization of the Ranger keys, and the public, both young and old, bet on these fights. Since we last saw them, the Gokaigers have gone their separate ways over the years, and Captain Marvelous looks to take down this public gambling operation, while Guy or Gokai Silver opposes him and supports the Ranger battle. Marvelous even chooses to fight 100 other Rangers, with the stipulation that if he loses, he will lose his key. But if he wins, he gets all the other keys. But it's revealed that the organization running these battles isn't exactly on the up and up, and the Rangers eventually join together and treat us to the fan service we all came for. Gokaiger is insanely popular, and it is awesome to see how they've changed. Next up at number 2 is the Deca Ranger 10th Anniversary. This is a V-Cinema release that takes place 10 years after the events of the show, obviously. Since the show, the Rangers have gone different paths, and the SPD headquarters have been moved underground. Doggy Kruger has been injured in the line of duty, putting him in critical condition, and Kruger has also been branded an alienizer now and has been charged with multiple crimes. While Kite Ridley is now overseeing the operation of the Deca Rangers with a ruthless and corrupt agenda that will cause our heroes to band together and fight once again to prove Doggy Kruger's innocence and purge the corruption at headquarters.
ジャスミンはエスパーである。その手を通して人の心が読み取れるのだ。
Since we saw them last, Bond has been traveling the galaxy with Fire Squad, Jasmine got married and had a kid, and they were replaced within the squad by Neo Deca Red and Neo Deca Yellow, who serve as a source of corruption from within the team and kinda just act like crooked cops. This is a cool conspiracy story that really showcases the detective skills of the team here, as well as Umiko's desire to find out the truth and to push on even when it would be way easier to give up. We of course have a ton of nostalgia because it's an anniversary movie, but this is a legitimately good mystery story, and it's super satisfying how Umiko starts figuring things out towards the end. Deca Ranger is a 10 out of 10 season, and that tradition of quality continued into this film. Watching this made me wish that we had a Deca Ranger / Kamen Rider double crossover movie. Toei, please? Please? And my number 1 most favorite Super Sentai movie of all time. Like, this is the movie, if you walk up to me on the street and say, hey Acrimony, give me one Super Sentai movie to watch, this is the one I'm gonna tell you. It is Gokaiger, Goseiger, Super Sentai 199 Hero Great Battle. This is a theatrical release, and it is the 35th anniversary project of the franchise. Like, honestly, if this movie wasn't a theatrical release, it would be a shame. It is just that explosive and epic and jaw-dropping at times. Our lead teams are Goseiger and Gokaiger, but this film features 199 heroes from the previous 34 years of Sentai leading up to Gokaiger, as you'd probably assume by the name. This takes place after the events of Goseiger and between episodes 16 and 17 of Gokaiger. This is an absolutely legendary movie that feels like a big-budget celebration of the entire franchise, and it's an absolute must-watch if you're a fan of Super Sentai at all. Like, if you tell me that you're a fan of Sentai and you said you've never seen 199 Hero Great Battle, I'm gonna be like, go watch it. Like, right now. There are many Sentai team-ups, but this one feels like a climax to the franchise. Like, something that the entire history of Sentai has been building up to and leading to. Like, it's all been leading to this moment, which for a show that has so many seasons, that is insanely impressive to pull off. It just has a big and important vibe that will hook you. We start with a huge battle featuring many Rangers, and I think it's cool that they pretty much gave the audience what they came to see within the first 3 minutes of the movie, which, let's be real, it's tons of Rangers fighting. You know, you start up this movie, that's what you're looking for, is tons of Rangers fighting. And they give it to you right off the rip. The beginning of this movie kind of just prepares you for the absolute mountain of fan service that you're about to see. After the battle, the Rangers' powers scatter throughout the universe until they fall into the hands of everyone's favorite scallywags, the Gokaigers. The Gosaigers take offense to the Gokaigers possessing their powers, snatching the keys out of the Gokaigers' hands, and attempting to take back Gosei Knight's key by force, which is something that Captain Marvelous seems pretty entertained by. Zangyak forms an alliance with the Black Cross Army from Goranger, giving our heroes a new threat to battle against, and eventually the Rangers would ally with each other. This movie, of course, features a ton of Rangers in costumes, but we also see a few unhinged that we haven't seen in a while, that longtime fans of the franchise will definitely enjoy. I think this is something that sets this movie apart, is that they actually wrote unique stories for some of these returning characters instead of just leaving them in costume. This movie is classic and thrilling and incredible, and I really wish I could have seen it on the big screen. And you know what, guys? I've been watching pretty much nothing but Sentai movies for like a month to make this video. So if you enjoyed it, it would mean tons to me if you would smack the out of that like button. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time. Bye!